Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Brandt, President and CEO of AIM Employers Association, and welcome to This Week at Work.
Welcome to the only show about the workplace that offers you front row seats and a microphone, bringing you practical, timely, and accurate insights so that you can more effectively lead your organization. It's Thursday, May 11th, episode 230. Today, we dive deeper into the recent NLRB decision that changes the standards relating to discipline or discharge of workers who dish out abusive or profane conduct while protected under Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act. It's important every employer understands the factors from which the level of protection is derived, from spontaneity to subject matter, level of profanity, loudness, and if after all they had it coming. This is your chance to ask the expert. If you haven't already, submit your questions now. All this and more on This Week at Work.
All right, welcome back. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Nick, that was a great intro, and I want to remind everyone, submit your questions should you have them. Bert, where are you today? A little bit of a nomad over the next couple of weeks here, are you?
Oh, I don't even know what time zone I am. Actually, I'm out in California right now. So if you can do a little bit of quick math, you could figure out it's early out here.
Yeah, if my math is right, it's probably about 5:30 a.m. your time. What has you in California currently?
It is Ogletree Deacon's National Workplace Strategy Seminar. We've got about 600 clients and guests out here in San Diego for our national seminar. We've got approximately 80 sessions over the course of Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then a couple of post-conference sessions on Saturday. It's a great program. There's something absolutely for everyone. I would definitely encourage everyone to try to attend next year, although I haven't heard the announcement yet. That usually comes tomorrow, the announcement on where we're hosting it next year.
Yeah, that's I know every year you have invited me to be there, and I apologize for not being able to make it this week. I also was doing a little traveling, not as extreme as you have been and are, but I do want to attend that. 80 sessions is quite impressive for a national conference like that. So hats off to you and Ogletree. You guys are a first-class organization. There's no doubt about it. And if you're a member, if you use Ogletree as your law firm, there is really no stones left unturned. The resources are unbelievable. Bert, I know you're proud of your employer, and I'm proud to be associated with you and the Ogletree team. So thank you for all that you do.
Likewise, and I appreciate the relationship with AIM. It's nice because I've actually run into a couple of the friends of the show and have gotten them lined up over the next few weeks to join us again. Jen Betts, everyone who will remember,
our AI
Jen,
expert. Yeah,
yep, she's going to be back on the program again to talk about the latest developments on AI and the potential liability, exposure, and usefulness of AI for business. And then, of course, I ran into our good friend and Washington, D.C. insider, Jim Plunkett, who will also be on very soon to give us the latest insights into the goings-on in D.C. And of course, we know there's a lot. I mean, we've got the next presidential campaign starting to shape up. We've got former President Trump, who was convicted by a jury of sexually assaulting a woman in a department store changing room sometime in the 90s. And he's been ordered to pay $5 million to this woman he says he never met. And then on the other side, Republican members of the House.
Not his type, right?
Not his type. And then on the other side, Republican members of the House yesterday held an hour-long press conference to announce the initial results of their investigation into the Biden family and at least $10 million in payments from foreign governments to 9 members of the Biden family, including to some of Biden's grandchildren. And then to top it all off, we've also got the House Republicans investigating the weaponization of the federal intelligence agencies, and specifically looking into a false letter signed by 51 former intelligence agency officials on the eve of a debate during the last presidential campaign that said the infamous Hunter Biden laptop, quote, bore all of the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign. and that letter was in fact false. So DC is fully in dysfunction, and here we all are, just citizens of the country watching our money be used in ways that probably don't help the bulk of us.
Yeah, we really are not trying to ever be a political program, but employers have to be involved because these things do affect employment practices for sure, and the way that we run and operate our businesses across the country or even around the world. But it's embarrassing to me. It's really embarrassing what Washington has become, and I'll just call it the trash and the activity that takes place there. And it's really not got anything to do with the interest of us as citizens and so on. I would like
Phil, I know you say we try not to be political. I'm equal opportunity. I mean, I've given you one side on one of the negatives on Trump today, and then some of the negatives going on with the dysfunction of the current presidential administration and the Republicans investigating him. I'm equal opportunity here.
I believe you are. I'm just saying I'm upset. I just don't like the dysfunction that exists on both sides of both parties, and the individuals that are sitting at the top of our organization. And what worries me really deeply is, it's just a little bit that we know. There's so much more that must be going on that we don't know about, and it saddens me as someone who tries to follow the rules and tries to establish practices for the good listeners of this program that we're just trying to get it right and trying to do the best that we can to help build better places to work and live, and that's what it's all about. But nevertheless, lots of activities, and stay tuned. I bet it only heats up from here. That's where my money lays. All right. So what about Chibs? Is he not with you?
He's not out here, but I could see him anytime. I'll get him lined up again.
Yeah. All right. I love our man Chibs when it comes to giving us some great insight on safety and other things. All right, we do have a poll question for you here. Thank you. Some of you are already answering them. Question one is, the NLRB is effective at protecting employees. I mean, that's what it's really intended to do. And we have some answers or selections for you. Question number two, how often do you think someone in your organization is seeking out information on the NLRB developments? Is this something that happens regularly or not? And then what is your favorite color from the list? And producer Nick has some incentive to try and brighten up the day a little bit with some simple questions and favorite coloring. We'll get back to those here shortly. All right, Bert, are you ready for Lawyer on the Clock?
Let's do it.
5:30, it's early. Let's hear it.
All right, it's time to look into what's trending in employment law. Lawyer, you're on the clock.
Phil, our little introduction banter we had back and forth about everybody needing to pay attention as to what's going on in Washington, D.C., and that most employers are just trying to get it right, whatever that means these days, and whatever it means from presidential administration to presidential administration. And I know we're going to be talking, as Nick said in the intro, about the NLRB today during the last segment of the program, but we're really going to come full circle in the program today. And I'm going to start off with Lawyer on the Clock. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case that could really change the power of federal regulatory agencies. And when I say that, you need to think about our friends at the EEOC, the Department of Labor, the National Labor Relations Board, the Federal Trade Commission, even the Department of Justice. And the Supreme Court, after nearly 40 years after it decided the case of Chevron versus National Resources Defense Council, has agreed to reconsider the standard that it established in that case. And specifically, what the court held in Chevron was that courts should generally defer to the federal administrative agency's interpretation of statutes as long as those agencies' interpretations are quote unquote reasonable. That's known as the Chevron standard or the Chevron deference. And it means, again, the court should generally defer to the agency interpretation. It doesn't mean that the courts always follow what the agencies say, but the courts generally defer to the agency's interpretation. And why this is significant is because every presidential administration, we all know that whoever's in the White House gets to control the administrative agencies. And so what happens is that the rules that those agencies put out during every presidential administration, and it's gotten really a lot worse since certainly during Obama, from Trump, and then back to Biden, the last 10 or so years, or 10, 15 years, it's really been a disaster for employers, because what happens is the pendulum at these administrative agencies has really started to swing wildly from left to right and back to left. And what that does is it creates uncertainty for employers. Employers don't know what the rules are, what the standards are, and the standards are always changing every 4 to 8 years. Makes it very difficult to comply. And so the Supreme Court has taken on the case called Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo. And the court, basically this involves a group of commercial fishing companies who are challenging a rule issued by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration Fisheries, another federal agency. And really, this ruling could have some profound impact on how the government operates. And it could be good news for employers whose actions really are often controlled by interpretations issued by those federal administrative agencies.
And I would say that then are backed by big lobbying dollars.
Correct. Well, certainly the lobbyists, try to influence the policy. And it's interesting because Congress, in order for something to become law, obviously it has to be passed by Congress, both the Senate and the House of Representatives. But when Congress is split, we end up with a lot of gridlock. And for better or for worse, gridlock means a little bit of certainty for employers. Well, what the presidents have done in the last several administrations, again, on the left and on the right, is they've decided, well, if we can't get what we want through legislation, we're going to do it through the administrative agencies. And that's why things swing so wildly at the administrative agencies, depending on who's in the White House. And I think that if the court overrules Chevron, and I don't have any insight one way or the other whether they will or they won't, but if the court would overturn the standard in Chevron, it would likely mean that pendulum would swing less wildly depending on who's in the White House. And that I think would be good for employers.
Yeah, I think, I try to break it down to the employers that are members of our association and the good people of the HR world who are doing their very best to comply. In one year they set off in one direction under one, presidential regime, and they understand the rules in the field, and they can put things in place. And then a few years later, they have to go and change that. And we're only talking about at a federal level there, but then when you get onto a state level and that local level, it even becomes more complicated, and it's almost impossible for, your everyday HR professional to be on top of the game, in front of the playing field and making things happen. We're always chasing this thing called compliance, and it's extremely not productive. I mean, that's the best way to say it. It's not productive in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's not productive. And, it's interesting you mentioned that, because, I started my legal career way back when, close to 30 years ago, and worked for a federal judge, and then went to a local labor and employment boutique before ending up at Ogletree Deacons, which has, of course, our national platform. And frankly, I don't know how the local labor and employment boutiques do it anymore, because they don't have the resources in every state and in every jurisdiction to provide the guidance to their clients across the country. Things have really changed.
We see that as simply put, like in background verification, as an example. Every city, every county, every state has a set of rules in which they follow. Some of them may just follow the federal rules, and then some of them have rules very different and unique to every city.
Yep.
The rules in the city of Chicago and Cook County are different than the rules in Missouri and St. Louis City, and different from St. Louis County. And it's crazy. And so what has happened, we were just working with an employer out of Illinois, and they wanted to learn more about changing their background verification business, because they just wanted to get quick results. Well, a vendor comes along and says, "Oh, we can give you quick results." Well, that's great, because you're going to search a database, but you're in Cook County and everyone you hire is in Cook County for the most part, and your database doesn't have anyone in Cook County in it. And so everything comes back clean, and they don't tell them that, and it's misleading, but it's intended because the HR person's just trying to hire people, right? And they don't want to wait. In Illinois can take, definitely can take a couple of days. And often if you're doing a state search, it can take you 2-3 weeks. It just is unreasonable. Yeah.
Yep. Agree. So that's what that Supreme Court case, we need to keep our eye on that one, because that could really, really fundamentally impact these administrative agencies. Next one I want to offer out there is, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, but we've talked about the Federal Trade Commission, again, one of those administrative agencies. They've been doing some, what they would consider to be their due diligence, and they have drafted a proposed rule. They did it back in January, that would ban most non-competes that they claim, the FTC estimates, would impact about 30 million Americans. And somehow they've estimated that this would boost wages by nearly $300 billion per year. Again, these are the FTC's estimates. Well, they received nearly 27,000 comments about this draft proposed rule, and they have deferred voting on this draft proposed rule until next year. And of course, next year we will be fully in campaign mode, and we'll have to see what shakes out with this. We know if the FTC votes to ban non-competes for most Americans, that will end up in litigation. And so who knows what would ultimately end up happening. But they did say that they are going to likely vote on it next year, and not vote on that this year.
Yeah. So in the meantime, while that can's been kicked down the road, it's probably a great idea to, contact Bert's firm and have them look at those. I know we do that, once a year or so, and we do use those in our business from time to time, and they do change, and they always come back with, red line changes for us, and stay on top of it. Don't just assume everything is status quo because it's been kicked down the road.
Yep. And last one, I'm not going to talk in too much detail about it, but just be aware, and this will really help our program come full circle today, because it'll segue us into talking about the National Labor Relations Board. Again, another agency that could be impacted by that Supreme Court case that's going to be heard on changing the standard for relying on administrative agency interpretations. Just to let everybody know that employees at a Starbucks store in Manhattan have petitioned to remove Workers United as the store's union representative. A decertification petition was filed yesterday for the Starbucks store located on 9th Avenue in New York City, and they're trying to kick the union out. The store first elected to unionize the Starbucks workers there by a vote of 46-36 last April 1 of 2022. That election was then certified by the NLRB, and now the employees at that store are voting to petitioning to kick the union out. This is the third bid to oust the Starbucks workers union in the last 2 weeks in New York State. Decertification petitions have also been filed at stores in Rochester, New York, and Buffalo, New York. There's also some other decertifications petitions that were filed at Starbucks stores in Oklahoma in October last year, in Georgia in April, but those two were withdrawn before an election date could be set. But it does look like the employees at a lot of these Starbucks stores who voted to unionize are now perhaps changing their minds.
Yeah, that's retail and unions, I think, is risky business for both sides of the business. I mean, unions are an organization that have to have some source of income, and that income is their dues. But nevertheless, I mean, you traditionally don't think of a retail worker, non-management retail worker, as someone that's chasing a career and a life of serving coffee or whatever retail chain they happen to work for. And that turn, it wouldn't be hard to bring in a few extra people to sway a vote one way or the other, and therefore risky business for both sides. I can't imagine the union's very happy with all that decertification activity.
No, because they're really focused on trying to organize. Union petitions are up. But interestingly, even though union petitions are up, union membership across the board actually ticked down again last year. It is now standing at 6% of the private sector workforce, which is 0.1% less than it was the year before. It was 6.1% in 2021. The unions are desperate to try to reverse that trend. And so again, only 6% of the private sector workforce belongs to unions. And because the unions are desperate to reverse those trends, they've really aggressively been going after restaurant and retail workers, which are two sectors of the economy they traditionally have never gone after. And they haven't gone after those because those workforces are oftentimes very transient. They move from one location to another location. They work for a period of time. They don't work for periods of time. Very unstable workforces. It's kind of the nature of the beast. These are a lot of times just starter positions, starter jobs. And, the unions have not gone after that. And they've trying to stem the tide of union losses. They have made a new effort in the last 10 or so years to really get aggressive in those sectors. But while they've added employees, particularly for the Service Employees International Union, the SEIU, and the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, all other unions are still trending down pretty dramatically.
Yeah, and I think that's a message I constantly work with employers on. I'm guessing at your 80-something breakout sessions at your conference, there's some activity and discussion around unionization efforts and practices and avoidance strategies and so on. But, the strategies I used to use when I was leading HR is, we would do programs every single year for our leadership teams and managers and supervisors around just what are the awareness signs and signals that might indicate concerted activity. And I'm guessing you have something on your agenda there about that, but that's a great idea to have either, AIM or Ogletree come in and walk your management through that, because you have to be aware, because unionization is down, it doesn't mean the effort is down. And I think
that's right.
That is a costly effort when you get into a union avoidance campaign.
That's exactly right. Not only do we have sessions, traditional labor sessions at our program, Phil, I think of the 80 sessions, we've got somewhere between 5 and 7 sessions dedicated to the topic of traditional labor law. But tomorrow morning, we actually have a keynote presentation from somebody that you've definitely heard me talk about numerous times on this program. Jennifer Abusive will be attending our program and presenting live. She is the NLRB's general counsel, and she'll be giving us some insight into what's going on at the NLRB and her very aggressive, what we would consider to be non-employer friendly agenda. And she's actually going to be speaking live to the attendees tomorrow here in San Diego to give us insight. We think it's valuable for our employers, for our clients, to be able to hear directly from the administrative agencies. And so we have invited her, and she's attending as a guest tomorrow.
That is a fantastic gift. I expect you to be front row, Bert, with your notepad. I can just envision you now. Jennifer, Bert Garland here, St. Louis, and then pounding out the questions, bring it back to us. We'll share it with our audience next week. That is a fantastic speaker.
Yep.
For sure. Great insight there. Good strategy. All right, Bert, I want to just draw your attention real quick to my sign back here. Abuse, taking abuse is not part of your job. And last week we talked a little bit about, I guess it was the NLRB having a position that concerted activity means you have to show more tolerance towards abusive nature. And there's been more development in that space.
Yeah, I think probably let's take a quick look at our poll results, Phil, and let's see what our listeners have to say about the questions that we asked. Nick,
Yeah,
do you mind pulling those up?
Got them up right here. And so, yeah, on the first question, NLRB is effective at protecting employees. Well, we're right there on the fence, right there. The average is,
That's why
maybe
I
not.
don't like doing averages, Nick, because that gives the people an easy out in their answer. Absolutely. Okay, that's a good one. Let's see what else we have there. We'll put this together as we have the conversation. And see, how often do you think someone in your organization is seeking out info on the NLRB? We rely on outside resources to update us. Seems to be the highest one, of course. I would expect you to do that. There's a lot to follow there. And I would hope that that's someone on the leadership team, HR, and some level of other CFO, CEO, someone that's operations individuals that are really close to the people who are most protected and involved with the NLRB. I'm surprised that we don't concern ourselves with that, but that could be, I guess, I don't know, more management type organizations. That surprises me that almost 12% don't concern themselves with that. I'm assuming the 17.6% weekly are the listeners of our program every week.
Certainly the weekly and the monthly. Nick, what about the favorite color one? I don't see that one up here. There we go. All right.
There we go. We're looking at blue. No oranges. No oranges surprises me.
Yeah. But look at I'm surprised by purple. I would have guessed maybe green over purple. Not sure, but blue and purple shades, two shades that are similar there.
And red coming in third place. And interestingly, what color do blue and red make?
Blue and red?
Yeah.
Make what? What do they make?
Purple.
Purple.
Don't think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Blue, red. Yeah, I'm surprised by purple. All right. Well, let's get on to our topic. We've got just a few minutes left. So it's interesting looking at the results from that first poll the second poll about the number of employers that don't concern themselves with NLRB development, and then the 47% that rely on outside resources. And it just amazes me, Phil, that despite the number of times that you and I have talked about this on the program, and every time I talk about a traditional labor topic, which necessarily means that we are going to be talking about employee Section 7 rights, a lot of non-union employers still think that the NLRB and the National Labor Relations Act does not apply to them because they don't have a union. And that is absolutely positively incorrect. Almost every employee, almost every non-managerial and non-supervisory employee across this entire country has Section 7 rights under the National Labor Relations Act. And that's whether there's a union in place or there's no union in place. Again, I want to make it clear that almost every employee, anyone who's not a supervisory or managerial employee, as defined in Section 211 of the National Labor Relations Act, if they're not defined in Section 211 of the National Labor Relations Act as a manager or a supervisor, then the chances are about 99% chance that that employee has Section 7 rights, and the NLRB has jurisdiction to enforce the National Labor Relations Act against you as the employer.
Absolutely. It's a huge oversight.
Huge.
But so tell us more about what's going on with the change in, and I think this is exactly why maybe the Supreme Court is looking at this case or taking it up. As we have the General Motors case, it's been overturned now. Mm-hmm. As it relates to concerted activity, aggressive behavior. I'll just call it that.
Yeah, basically under the General Motors standard that was put in place during the Trump administration, that decision kind of harmonized the standard that had developed across some various decisions over time at the NLRB, that basically employers did not have to put up with their employees engaged in profane and abusive conduct toward the employer, no matter whether the employee was engaged in Section 7 protected activity or not. If the employees were engaged in Section 7 protected concerted activity, but they were behaving in a profane and even sometimes violent and threatening manner, the standard is that if the employer would have terminated the employee anyway, absent the protected concerted activity, then a termination or a discipline would stand. And what the NLRB has now said is that employers, in overturning the General Motors decision, employers have to tolerate profane, abusive conduct by employees if those employees are engaged in protected concerted activity. And so this marks a big shift and really puts employers in a difficult position, because now if you have employees who are engaged in protected concerted activity, and you think in terms of them protesting employees' terms and conditions of employment, or maybe trying to unionize and picket, and if they engage in profane, abusive, and sometimes even threatening conduct, the employer is now going to have to tolerate some of that misbehavior.
Yeah, and anyone that hasn't ever been through a union-free campaign, it does get out of control, and it gets out of control quick. But that's not all that we're talking about here. We're talking about much more extreme examples, or simple examples that can be extreme, when the employee thinks they're involved in concerted activity and management isn't sure if they are or aren't. And I don't know who the burden lies on: management to know it was concerted, or the employee to prove it was concerted. But I think that's what's to come. And I know I've crossed picket lines, unfortunately, and I've had to, cross protest lines when there are union-free campaigns, and I've had union-free meetings, and I've physically been attacked, and the guy, physically came over my desk and tackled me, and we started wrestling in these scenarios. I mean, they do get out of control very, very easily, and it's not something that I wish upon anyone, but it's going to be a very gray area in this space.
It is, and again, what happens, unfortunately, is that if an employee is disciplined or discharged under the standard because the employer says, I am not going to tolerate profane and abusive conduct, the union or the employee would then file an unfair labor practice charge. The NLRB would then investigate that charge, and they would make the determination whether or not to issue a complaint over that. And if the NLRB issues a complaint, they are the ones who have the burden to prove it. But if the NLRB has decided that employers have to tolerate profane and abusive conduct, and even though they have the burden to prove that the employer violated the law, violated the National Labor Relations Act, as I've said before, do you as the employer want to be that test case?
Yeah.
And that can be expensive.
And I want to be conscious of time, but I just want to close. So the NLRB, but the EEOC, who will govern fair, equal, non-harassment activity, those types of things. I don't know what the NLRB's role in that is, but I can see where these two agencies will conflict with each other.
Well, yeah, that is absolutely correct, and because
particularly they may govern two different groups of people.
Well, and again, it could conflict because the NLRB is saying that you as an employer have to tolerate some harassing and abusive and profane conduct, which could include language of race and gender and those types of things. And the NLRB is saying you as the employer have to tolerate this, but you then on the other side have a zero tolerance, no harassment, non-discrimination policy that needs to be enforced. And so again,
the NLRB doesn't cover management personnel, but EEOC does.
Correct.
There we go.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. We'll keep you up to date. Thank you for joining. We'll see you next week, 7:30. Bert, thank you for joining us at 5:30 a.m. Out in California. Good luck with your conference. Y'all
Thank you, Phil.
Go be good to people.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link, aimea.org/This Week at Work, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment, like LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you are. And you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.